Great. Good morning, everyone. My name is Jumoke Akintaylor, and I'm the hearing officer for San Francisco Public Works. Cherise Waiters is the clerk for this hearing, and this hearing is being recorded. Please contact us through Urban Forestry contact information on the agenda if you need additional information or have any questions. The public hearing is being held. There are 3 items on the agenda. Item number 1 is order number 207513, and this is to consider the tentative approval of the application for a surface mounted facility, site permit number 22SMF-00003, GT MobileNet of California Limited Partnership, that's Verizon Wireless, and the location is 2797 Bryant Street. The second hearing order number 207514 is to consider an appeal from the property owner for the fine issued for the illegal removal of one significant tree on the property of 60 Ventura Avenue. The fine that was levied for this illegal removal is $10,000. The third hearing order number 207515 is to consider an appeal from the property owner for the fine issued for the illegal pruning of 5 street trees and 1 significant tree on the property of 1851 Noriega Street. The fine levied for the illegal pruning is $13,812. Now, my job as the hearing officer is to gather the facts for the hearing items I just stated, to listen to testimonies, and to help our Director of Public Works make the determination. I will not be making any decisions today. Instead, what I'll be doing is I'll forward the findings from the hearing along with my recommendations to the director. The director will then make the final decisions. Now, once the director's determinations are made, the department will notify you, and you would, again, as stated, we have your contact information. And if you want that notification, please contact Urban Forestry. I will also ask Public Works staff to speak first, present the item, give us an overview of the permit application process and everything we're going to be discussing about the hearing order number today, about the hearing today. Then I would ask that the appellants or the protesters who submitted written comments to speak. Anyone who is also supporting the appellant or the protesters will speak next. And then I will give the applicant a chance to speak and answer any of the questions or comments. Each speaker, we have up to 5 minutes to speak. Cherise, are we at 5 minutes or 3?
We have been doing that at 3 minutes.
Okay, so each speaker, we have 3 minutes to speak, and the clerk will monitor the time for all speakers. When you hear the first bell, it will mean the speaker has 30 seconds left to speak. A louder second bell will signal that time is up. Comments and questions should be addressed to me and not the department or the applicant. If you cannot finish your comments within the allotted time, you may submit written testimony to me by the end of this hearing. If I feel the question is warranted, I will ask the questions. After all comments are completed, I will close that item. So now we will begin with agenda item number, hearing order number 207513. Can I have Public Works make its presentation? Do we have anyone?
Excuse me, Miss Hearing Officer, can we have public comment first, please? Item number 2.
Okay, for 207513?
No, item number 2 on the agenda.
Which
public
is
comment.
207514.
Public comment.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. I wasn't looking at your agenda.
Okay.
Yeah, we have someone's hand up. Public comments? Can we go ahead? I think we have Gregory's hand up.
Can you unmute Mr.
Yeah.
Gregory?
Yeah.
Hey,
unmuted.
good morning. This is Gregory from the Bureau of Street Use and Mapping, and I will be presenting the first item. So I have no public comment, but that's why I'm on.
Okay.
Thank you. So do we have any public comments? And so this is to public comments on things that are not on today's agenda.
Or items not related to today's, sorry, we have comments with respect to 2797 Bryant, but I'm not sure whether this is the right time for those or not.
No, we'll take that after presentation. This public comments is for matters not on today's agenda.
Okay, thank you.
Jasper, I think.
That's who was speaking just
Okay.
now. So I don't believe we have any public comments at this time.
So we can move on to hearing order 207513.
Okay, and I believe that's Gregory Slocum.
Yes.
Hey, good morning. Can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
All right. Am I able to do a share screen?
Sure, just one moment. Let me promote you to panelist.
All right, it's allowed me to rejoin. Can everyone hear me loud and clear?
Yes, we can hear you.
All
and
right.
see you. Thank you.
Great. Give me one moment here and we'll get going. All right. Can you please, are you able to see the slides that I'm presenting right now? Excellent, thank you. My name is Gregory Slocum. I'm presenting for the Bureau of Street Use and Mapping. This is a continuance of a prior hearing. This hearing originally occurred in June of last year. My colleague Leoncio Palacios presented for BSM, and he's left our organization, so I'm filling in. And I want to demonstrate some appreciation to our colleagues for fitting us in today on this agenda. Surface mounted facility 22-00003 is located at 2797 Bryant. It's proximate to the corner of Bryant and 26th Street. Originally, this was heard in June of 2022. And typically when we have objectors, we seek to facilitate some type of conversation between an objector and an applicant. In this instance, I think the supervisor's office also asked to explore if there was any action that could be undertaken to mollify concerns that have been raised. The applicant has asserted that there's no comparable site, and as such, they're requesting that we move forward with permitting at the requested site. We have provided the objections within the folder for the hearing officer, in addition to a response that we received from the applicant. And then just for some additional context, this is a photo simulation that's provided by the applicant. They're seeking to erect a new pole that's not there. This is not modifying a pre-existing pole. And the applicant has asserted that the reason that this pole is being placed here is because there's not a comparable site that they can place it for and effectively utilize. So this is going to be a pretty brief overview, just in so much as it's a continuation of a prior hearing, but just some things worth knowing. There have been no material changes following our June 2022 hearing. There are no additional updates in light of this continuance for Public Works to provide. This application is moving forward in the same fashion it was presented last June. We have notified objectors that there's a hearing, and then we've also notified to these objectors that no changes have resulted from the objections or since the last time this has been presented publicly. The objectors have provided updated concerns or additional letters, which I've provided in the hearing folder for the officer. And the applicant has also provided an additional follow-up letter for consideration. So I'm going to go back to the last slide just for some, a last impression of what's being proposed. And as you'll notice, this photo simulation was produced a while ago, so there's nothing new or any material changes for us to present today. We are simply moving through our workflow process on this. If there are any specific questions, I'll do my best to address, but also worth mentioning, I took over this case midstream. I did not present the last hearing, so my understanding may be limited to the documents that were produced thereafter, but happy to entertain anything should you have any questions. And that's all I have to present today.
Thank you. Okay, so we'll take public comments on this on hearing order number 207513. Are there any public comments on this order number? Please raise your hand if you have public comments. Okay, we have one. Jasper has his hand up.
Once again, we're the residents, just checking that this is the right time for us to speak.
Yes, it is.
All right, and I also have a representative that is going to start and make certain comments.
If their hands are up, yes, I have. We have you, and then Ariel's hand is also up.
Yeah, Ariel's going to start.
Okay, 3 minutes.
Hi, good morning. My name is Ariel Strauss. I represent the protester in this matter. Is this the right time?
Yes.
Okay,
Public
great.
comments.
No, as a protester is the right time.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, imagine my 3 minutes are starting now. My name is Ariel Strauss, again, counsel for the protester. As a special matter, order 206293 exceeded department's authority and is invalid. Article 27 for surface mounted facilities specifically provides for a community involved process to consider multiple feasible sites. And there is only one exemption for that specific process, and that is in section 2703B. It's described in the materials I submitted. And that section provides if an applicant demonstrates to the department there's only one feasible location for a proposed surface mounted facility, the department may by order waive the required pre-application approval process and authorize the applicant to submit an application without a pre-approved location subject to any reasonable conditions the department may place in a proposed surface mounted facility. Then it goes on to say, by order or regulation, the department shall establish standards for determining when there's only one feasible location for a proposed surface mounted facility, but such standards will be based on technical or physical constraints only, end quote. Now, this order, the order that the Verizon is submitting its application under, order 206293, was established after Verizon was prohibited from using Article 25, the article that was designed for cell towers, and after the Board of Supervisors decided not to move forward with the proposal to allow surface mounted facilities under that Article 25 revision. In this case, the applicant has not demonstrated, and the order does not require the applicant to demonstrate that there's only one technically feasible location. Instead, the applicant has to only show that there's no site within 200 feet that can go on an existing pole. That's a clear violation of the Article 27 community involvement standards, and it does not allow Verizon, it's not a valid basis for Verizon to avoid those standards. As a result, my clients are asking that Verizon identify all the potentially feasible locations and also hold a community involved meeting so that the public can understand what options are available. Verizon has excluded many feasible locations, which Jasper will discuss in a moment. But more than just excluding those locations, they've used bases that are not specified in regulations, such as the location of water meters, and also have not even taken practical steps to consider things that can be done to make sites available. For instance, the orders Exhibit 2, A2 standard mentions the location of traffic signs. However, in our conversation with SFMTA, traffic signs can readily be relocated so that when the site is ultimately installed, it can be placed where the traffic sign is, if that's the right site, and the traffic sign can easily move to another location. We're also aware from public record requests that the applicant has not submitted the 5-year plans that are required under the code, and makes it very difficult for staff and for any members of the public to understand how these sites will be used in the most effective way. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead, Jasper.
Is it possible for me to show a slide?
Sure, I can promote you to panelist and then you'll be able to share your screen. So just a moment.
Great, thank you.
Okay, you'll need to unmute yourself one more time, please. And when you begin speaking, I'll begin the 3-minute timer. You want to turn on your video?
Yeah. Thank you. Hold on, I'm just turning up. Yes, thank you. The first thing I just want to note is that as community members, we're not coming at this from the spirit of seeking to block Verizon from putting up their polls. We're sympathetic to their overall goals. The spirit that we're coming at this is that what we do object to is the process that's been followed around the lack of community input and also just a tendency for inaccuracies and in Verizon's work, simply saying and making claims around things that a simple walk of the sidewalk would show are plainly untrue. And I'm just going to highlight that in one specific case. So as you can see in this slide, the proposed site around 2906 Bryant Street, which is discussed in the material. Verizon in their materials references 3 points. By the way, often using photos that are several years out of date, which we find confusing. The first comment that they have on the site is that the communication line drops require clearance. First is that, as demonstrated by this simple photo, and also by the architecturally stamped drawings that we provided, this communication drop is 8 feet from the proposed site. This first satisfies the regulation, and furthermore, this drop is actually further on this proposed site, further from the distance between Verizon's proposed site and the power lines above. So on this criteria, our proposed site is clearly superior, and a simple walk down to the street and walking up and down would demonstrate that to be the case. We do wonder whether they've visited the site. The second is, they claim that the site has issues with coverage. This is a confusing claim because very simply, Verizon in its previous materials indicated that the pole that you see in the photo directly in front of you would be an eligible pole for potentially adding a small cell to that pole. That was part of Verizon's original application. So how could a pole within 5 feet of an alternative proposed location not be relevant, particularly when that pole that Verizon indicated as part of their alternative 1 in their original application is actually directly in line and further from the proposed site than this proposed 2906. Once again, I just wonder whether even basic homework has been done. And then the final point that Verizon raises that there's a water meter on the sidewalk. It's common that water meters are near poles. And by the way, on Verizon's proposed site, there's actually underground utilities closer to the pole than in our proposed site. So on every key aspect, this site, as just one example, is superior to Verizon's proposed site. And this would be clear to anyone who just took the time and simply walked up and down the sidewalk on 26th Street. And this could be confirmed by a simple walk of the site. So all I ask is that things be said that are true, and that basic work is done in order to validate and give true indications.
Thank you. Okay, we have Helena.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the time and thank you for this opportunity. Could I also share my screen? I think Jasper's still sharing.
I'll promote you to panelist.
Yes, appreciate it. One moment. Hang on one second. Apologies, I'm having a little bit of trouble opening this.
Do you see the share screen icon at the bottom next to participants?
I do. Let me just.
Yeah, just double click on that. That should get you to share your screen.
Thank you. Here we go. Okay. All right. So I'm Jasper's my husband. I'm also the owner at 2797 Bryant. Again, I think I just want to highlight one aspect, which is that my husband and I consider ourselves to have done a bit of the work that Verizon should have done. Again, what we are asking for is to not have a standalone pole show up in front of our living room window without any community input process, but rather the burden of proof was on Verizon to show that they've done due diligence to really investigate different sites in the neighborhood. And in Verizon's site analysis, they were using Google Maps photos, and we had a conversation with them before our June hearing where their analyst walked us through their process, which was using Google Maps. Those photos, I have to say, it's a little bit like Googling something and turning it in as your homework. Those photos are really out of date. I mean, the paint colors are like several years old. Houses haven't been renovated. We actually went and took a site architect. We had a draftsman come through. We did 4 extensive field surveys to actually map out the distance that are regulatory. So using extensive advanced methods to measure the distances to overhead power lines and service drops. It is a lot of work. I think it is a pain. And I know that we are the test case for this waiver process of the community input process with the standalone poll. And we are motivated not only to not necessarily want the poll and to want a full community process. I would also say this test case, it's important to us that Verizon not be their only arbiter of feasible sites so that they can use this waiver and skip the community process because not everyone has the resources and time and energy and will to like hire an architect. And this is stamped and licensed. It shows different alternative spots that meet the regulations. And this is all in the materials we provided you, hearing officer. But I think it's important for us as this test case to say, hey, if you're going to use this waiver, please do a good job, do due diligence. And the city has a responsibility to guard its citizens from Verizon. Verizon's corporate interest is to push this through quickly and as easily as possible. It's hard to do a site analysis like this. And so as a test case, I think we're very motivated to say we've done
30 seconds.
Accurate. 30 seconds. Yeah. And just make sure that other sites, this is the first poll of a large 5G network. Other sites will have the same benefit of having this material presented to them to have input as a community, and that the city and the community and Verizon's corporate interests are in balance in a way that aren't with this waiver process. And so we're having to sort of set that up and present this material. So this is really just showing that we've done our due diligence on Verizon's behalf. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments? I don't see any other hands up. Okay. If there are no hands up, Gregory, can I ask? Okay, there's one more hand. Melanie's hand is up.
Good morning, Ms. Aiken-Taylor. I am outside counsel for the applicant Verizon Wireless. Did you want to ask some questions of Greg first, or should we go ahead and do our presentation?
Yes, please go ahead and do your presentation.
May I share just one photo simulation, please?
I will promote you to panelist. Go ahead and share your screen. You have the floor. You're muted. Okay, go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. You're able to see the photo simulation?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Good morning. We appreciate you hearing us on this agenda today. My name is Melanie Sengupta. I'm outside counsel for Verizon Wireless. I'm joined by my colleague Paul Alberton, as well as the Modus team, Verizon team, and Raj Mathur, who's here with Hammett and Edison to answer any questions regarding RF emissions. State and federal law both require San Francisco to have a process to allow standalone poles to be placed in the public right-of-way where there are no other options to place wireless infrastructure. And that is what's been done here. San Francisco has created a process for that. That's been through Article 27. This is one of the first applications to go through this process. It's not the only one, and it's not the actual first. There are applications that have preceded it and have come after it, and there's an approved application now. And wanted to address a couple of the comments that the protesters have brought up. The first one is, I think Mr. Malcolmson had posed a site further down the street as the quote superior location. But here, superior is a subjective thing. Here, we have shown a location that is not directly in front of anybody's window or anybody's door, and in fact is 10 feet away from the closest window. It meets all of the criteria that is laid out in the DPW order that governs this waiver. And to be clear, the scope of this hearing is just for the waiver of the location approval process. That's what Verizon applied for, and that's what DPW has confirmed, that this is the only feasible location pursuant to DPW's guidelines and standards. The guidelines do protect views in the sense that there are minimum distances required from residential windows, and those distances have been met here, but there aren't any other protections for private views or property values, as the protesters have stated in their letter. This is an undesignated view street, which means that standalone poles are allowed on it. Standalone poles are not allowed
30
on
seconds.
view streets. We have been working both with the protesters here and the supervisor's office. Modus has done multiple site visits, and they feel confident based on the materials that we submitted to the hearing officer last week that there aren't any other locations. And indeed, this is the best location for this standalone pole. The DPW tentative approval has confirmed it, and we've gone back and confirmed it as well. And the time for challenging the order has passed. So thank you so much, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. I have a question. And you did say you went, just help me understand that you went through the process of elimination of different locations. Is that part of what you're saying, or was this one location that was selected? Did you go through? Okay.
There are multiple steps in the process. So the order specifically asks the applicant to demonstrate that there are no existing poles within a 200-foot radius that could be used to place the wireless facility. And Verizon has demonstrated that there is no other pole within a 200-foot radius that fulfills the coverage objective here. That's because these poles in this neighborhood are PG&E poles. It's not an undergrounded district. So we don't have SFPUC or SFMTA light standards to be placed upon. And PG&E has very strict regulations about which poles they'll allow wireless facilities on, and none of these poles were eligible. So that's step one, is to find existing infrastructure where a wireless facility can be placed. When that was absent, we then look to see, well, where can we place it where we're going to meet all the criteria, and DPW has stringent criteria, and also, impact the community, in the least amount, meaning not in front of doors, not in front of windows, trying to be, as less intrusive as possible. And so that is how this site was identified. And then since then, we have met with the protesters, and they identified additional sites that they thought were feasible. And Modus studied those alternatives. They did site visits, and they determined that those sites were not feasible to meet this coverage objective in this area.
Got it. Thank you. All right, thank you. We have 2 hands up. So
They have both spoken. Did you?
they
want
have both
to-
spoken.
Did you-
If there are no additional public comments, Mr. Malcolmson and Ariel, since you have both spoken already, I don't know that, I think maybe one of you can speak again if you have any other comments, but I want to open it up to the public. If there are no additional public comments, then I can have one of you speak. Are there any other additional comments? This is the time for you to raise your hand now. Okay. If no additional public comments, I will have only one of you speak. So who is it going to be, Mr. Strauss or Mr. Malcolmson?
I'm not able to tell, Ms. Taylor.
Both
because we
hands
don't-
are up. Yeah.
Right, and we don't have the chat feature available.
Okay.
So you just.
So I'm just
tell
going
me.
to allow one
Okay.
of them. Okay.
Okay.
Mr. Strauss, go ahead.
Thank you. In response to your question, on behalf of the protester, I want to also be clear that I understand your question to be whether Verizon went through in identifying alternatives. And what Verizon is saying that they have done is that they have complied with the order's requirement to identify utility poles that exist within 200 feet. That is different from identifying whether there are any other feasible alternatives. The only alternatives that are identified here are those that the applicant, in their own diligence and effort as a homeowner, has identified, and they've then verified that certain of those alternatives are feasible with assistance of an architect and the stamped architect plans that were submitted. However, that is not the same as identifying whether any feasible alternatives that normally would be required if there were not a waiver. And the issue here is whether that waiver is valid, as Ms. Sengupta correctly identified, whether that waiver process is correctly applied here. And in this case, it is not, because the applicant has not demonstrated there are no feasible alternative locations, and there's only one technically feasible location, which Verizon and Modus have not here done. Many cities do require that an applicant demonstrate there are no feasible alternatives within a certain distance. This city of San Francisco requires that as well. And if there are alternatives that are feasible, then it requires that there be, under Article 27, community meetings and discussion of those alternatives. That has not happened. Instead, Verizon simply notified the city that there are not sites available on existing poles within 200 feet. And 200 feet is not necessarily the technically feasible radius of the technology as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So, any other questions? Gregory, do you have any comments on this?
Good morning. Nothing to add materially other than Public Works is of the belief that this met the standards set forth in the order. That is all I have to add in this moment.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other public comments on this order number 207513? Okay, in the absence, Melanie, go ahead. And I don't know that I'm going to keep going back and forth. This is going to be the last one if there are no other public comments. So go ahead, since I allowed.
Sure, I'll make it quick. Mr. Strauss has kind of identified a tautology here. The only way that you can go through the community meeting process, which Verizon has on other sites, is if there are other feasible locations. And because there aren't any other technically feasible locations here, that is why Verizon Wireless went through the waiver process. So that's it. Thank you so much. I appreciate your indulgence.
Thank you. So if in the absence of any other public comments, I'm going to close this hearing order number and move to the next one. So order number 207513 is now closed. Thank you. We would now hear order number 207514, which is to consider an appeal from the property owner for the fine issued for the illegal removal of one significant tree on property 60 Ventura Avenue. The fine levied for the illegal removal is 10,000. So I'll have Public Works make its presentation. Chris, I believe that's you.
Thank you. Good evening or good morning. I have a hearing this evening, so I'm thinking ahead. Thank you. My name is Chris Buck, and I'm the Urban Forester for Public Works, Bureau of Urban Forestry. And what I'll do is go through a bunch of introductory slides that does a pretty in-depth overview, but as quickly as possible, about our urban forestry ordinance, Article 16 of the Public Works Code. So I'm going to share my screen in a moment, go through a lot of slides. A lot of the information I cover up front will then allow us to not repeat it for a couple of the cases that we have. We only have 2 items for the rest of this agenda, but we often have 5. And so just sort of going through the basis for why we're here this morning is important. So let me go ahead and share my screen and pull up a PowerPoint that I have. So let's see. Share screen. Let's move this over here. Let me click over to the PowerPoint and get that pulled up so I can see that. Share screen. Here we go. So Cerise, if you could just confirm if the hearing screen looks good to you.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, thank you so much. Thanks for your patience, everybody. So here we are at the Public Works hearing, and we'll move on. This just takes a moment for the advanced tab to work the first moment, and then after that, we should be fine. Here we go. So we have a tree ordinance, and they establish authorization and standards for addressing a wide range of issues regarding trees. In San Francisco's ordinance, as we mentioned, is codified under Article 16 of the Public Works Code. So Section 808 within Article 16 outlines protection of trees and landscape material, and subsection A, lowercase a, injury to or destruction of trees is prohibited. It shall be unlawful for any person to intentionally, maliciously, or through gross negligence injure or destroy a street tree, any tree on city property, a significant tree, or a landmark tree. And specifically, in addition to the penalties set forth in subsections A and B above, the director may require any person who removes or destroys a tree in violation of the provisions of this article to pay for each tree removed or destroyed a sum of $10,000 or the tree's replacement value, whichever is greater. The director may require any person who injures a tree in violation of the provisions of this Article 16 to pay a sum of money equal to the diminishment of the tree's value as set forth in the current edition of the Guide for Plant Appraisal, overseen by the Council of Tree and Landscape Appraisers, which is now in its 10th edition. Where an abutting property owner or adjacent, meaning the fronting property owner, removed a street tree or trees without obtaining a permit, the department shall require that the property owner plant a replacement street tree or trees with total diameter 6 inches above ground that is equal to or greater than the total diameter of the street tree or trees that were removed without a permit. This will come up in one of the cases. Section 806, permitted planting and removal of street trees. This relates to the requirement to obtain a permit to remove a tree. And highlighted in red, if the department grants a tree removal permit, it shall require that a street tree or trees of equivalent replacement value to the one removed be planted in the place of the removed tree or impose an in lieu fee. We don't have an item directly related to protection of trees, so I'm going to gloss over this, but we do have extensive requirements for protecting trees during construction. And then within our Urban Forestry Ordinance, Article 16, Section 802, we do actually define injure or injury, and there's quite a list of all the various ways that trees may be injured. Some of them are relics of literally gold rush or the 1906 earthquake, where when people made fires in the parks, they were injuring the trunks of trees. So there's some old stuff in here, but at the very end, you see highlighted in red, pruning, which in and of itself will kill or cause a tree to decline, or severing of all or part of a tree. And I just want to point out that we issue fines not because we're stating that the tree has or will die, nor that it's going to decline immediately. It even just says severing of all or even part of a tree. So that's important to highlight. So within Section 811, we have specific penalties called out. We've already sort of highlighted this, that the director may require a person who's violated provisions to pay a sum of $10,000 or the tree's replacement value. So we've covered that top paragraph. The Section 3 talks about additional penalties. This is just for developers or others who are kind of repeat offenders. I'm going to skip over that because we're not dealing with that today. So a little bit of a summary. So Article 16, trees are more than just beautiful additions to urban life. They are an essential component of the city's ecosystem and provide enormous environmental and social benefits. A permit is required to remove any street tree, significant tree, or landmark tree. It is illegal to injure a tree. Injuries can include excessive pruning and malicious acts like nailing objects to trees, and negligent acts like vehicular accidents. An illegal removal of a tree requires replacement with equivalent inches in total diameter of the street tree or trees that were removed. And the final bullet point, it is the property owner's responsibility to know the law. Ignorance or just not being aware of the code or the law is not something that is typically, an excuse for that, even if it's not intentional. So getting into the specifics of how trees are pruned, these are industry standards. I try to joke sometimes that sometimes people think that San Francisco is way out ahead and trying to do too much, like banning Happy Meals or just doing something that other cities don't do. And I do want to note that these are international pruning tree management standards, not just unique to San Francisco or California, but they are the industry standards internationally. So just a note about that. So one of the general rules of thumb, the best management practice, is to not remove more than 25% of the tree's canopy within a year or a growing cycle. There's reasons for that. Removing too much foliage may on a branch or a limb may stress the tree, may produce weakly attached branches the following year and into the future. So what you end up with is branches that are actually more prone to failing than had they not been pruned before. You also do not want to cut back to a branch that is less than 1/3 or 1/2 the size of the main branch. It's important to selectively remove branches throughout the tree, not just the lowest branches you can reach. Removing the lowest branches when it is unnecessary is sometimes called limbing up. This can cause a tall, spindly tree to form, and it can also reduce trunk flare and girth of the tree. Lower branches help the vigor in the lower portion of the tree, and this is especially important in conifers, but really for all trees. This is an example of topped trees. This is an image provided by Friends of the Urban Forest in a tree booklet that was produced many years ago. What happens when a tree is excessively pruned or topped? The confusion is that the public sees a flush. If we're lucky, we see a flush of healthy new growth. And that's not the sign of a healthy tree. It's actually a predictable stress response. Because as we all learn growing up, trees need leaves to photosynthesize. So the new growth is weakly attached, rapid growth, and the tree is trying to recover energy producing leaves as quickly as possible. So topping creates weakly attached rapid new growth, and all the tree's resources are used up trying to recover leaf canopy. So trees have stored energy in their branch tips, but also throughout their trunk and roots. So repeatedly topping a tree may eventually cause the tree to lose energy resources and may no longer be able to, in a stress response, react to the injuries and produce new leaves to survive. This is an example of a tree that died after being topped. Now, what happens when the tree sprouts back vigorously as a stress response, and then you go maybe 10 years and you're not correctly pruning out and training those new branches? Well, what ends up producing is a bit of a quote unquote witch's broom of new stems. And you can kind of look at this image and pick during storms or even mild wind, which of these branches is going to break off next. It's a pretty terrible structure that makes the tree highly prone to have a branch or limb failure. The secondary impacts are also that these large cuts are an open doorway to insects in decay or disease. And so over time, decay breaks down the cellulose in the wood and reduces strength. So trees stand up because wood has strength holding capacity. And when that wood is rotted, it loses all of that strength holding capacity within the tree. An extreme example is that then you have branches breaking from the decay as well. Pollarding, we will not touch on much today, but it's a bit of a specialty pruning. You can see that in front of City Hall or in the bandshell in Golden Gate Park. It's a specific process that's initiated one time. You top a tree once when it's much, much younger, and then you have to carry on only pruning the resulting sprouts each year and not cutting below the old pruning cut. That can be very confusing to the public, so we acknowledge that. Also, power lines and trees. We get a lot of calls and inquiries about which power lines do you have to worry about. The good news is that it's really not a property owner's sort of burden to worry about pruning trees near power lines. The reason for this is public safety. PG&E is required by law and does prune trees away from power lines. They inspect all trees and plants once a year and prune trees when necessary. So in addition to that, the lines that are in the lower portion of the poles, lowest to the ground, these tend to be phone and cable and are not energized, where they are designed to be in contact. And we actually encourage people to allow the trees canopies to screen and hide these sort of ugly and unsightly lines. So that's a good thing for people to be aware of. And then working towards wrapping up our preliminary presentation is Street Tree SF. So we had a ballot initiative in November 2016, which proposed that the city take on the maintenance responsibility of all street trees in San Francisco, which is what has been occurring since July 1st, 2017. Prior to that, the city only maintained 1/3 of the street trees, generally along the main thoroughfares and corridors within the city. So now we do have increased internal tree crews and contracts with private contractors to systematically address the worst first, and then eventually a 3 to 5 year pruning cycle to maintain all the street trees in San Francisco. These are just some visuals taken from our website showing that we have a plan that's both strategic and systematic. These stats are outdated. This is an older PowerPoint slide, but we have completed more than 50% maintenance of all the street trees in San Francisco, far greater than that, really. We're probably closing in on 60 to 65%. We've pruned and removed thousands of trees, and we continue to do it on a systematic, strategic basis. We leave door hangers prior to the work being done. We also try to do outreach, informing the public not to prune trees on their own. So again, I want to thank you for your patience, but this really does allow us to get more into the specifics of each case and not kind of repeat all the kind of basis for the fines that Public Works issues. And so now we can work into this. We'll start the presentation for 1851 Noriega Street. And this is order 20715, an appeal from the property owner for the fine issued for illegal pruning of 5 street trees and 1 significant tree at 1851 Noriega Street. The fine that was issued or levied for the illegal pruning is $13,812. The subject trees, here's an image of the subject trees. We like to show sort of a before photo of the subject trees in the property. This is at the corner of 26th Ave and Noriega, and the species is, the common name is red flowering gum. The Latin is Corymbia faecifolia, and it has bright red flowers in August, and that sometimes can be a bit of a nuisance because they stick very well to cars. Now-
Excuse me, Mr. Buck,
Yes,
could I interrupt you?
sure.
We had order number 207514 listed first for 60 Ventura Avenue.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I
Okay.
think you wanted to, okay, yeah.
No, why don't we do that then? We're going to move on to that one. And I do apologize.
Yeah, I think that's why the other person had their hand up.
Okay,
I see
all
she
right.
lowered it. Yes,
I do
Thank you.
apologize for that.
that's okay. Thank you.
Yep, 207-514 60 Ventura Avenue. So an appeal from the property owner for the fine issued for illegal removal of 1 significant tree on private property at 60 Ventura. So one technical detail, a significant tree is on private property, but within 10 feet of a public right of way. So technically not adjacent to, but on the private property at 60 Ventura Avenue. The fine levied for the illegal removal is $10,000. We like to show photos of the subject tree. The Google Street View images are blurred out, which is fine. Our sort of backup is Bing, B-I-N-G, bing.com. Again, it's just great to be able to pull up images so that we can look at the tree, what it looked like, or the site looks like. So we had issued a fine for removal without a permit. And one thing I want to talk about regarding this case is that in 2006, our code was amended to require that not just street trees require a tree removal permit, but trees that are on private property but within 10 feet of a public right of way are now referred to, as of 2006, as significant trees, meaning they are near a public right of way and provide a benefit to the general public. So the subject tree is a species of ilex or holly, and it is pictured here in off of the main sidewalk, so back of sidewalk or front yard setback area. These are ways that we often refer to this area of a property. So again, showing this image, Bing shows a date of May of 2022. So I believe that's approximate date when this image was taken by Bing and posted online. One thing also, this is, people often ask, well, how was this complaint received by the city? Complaints are received a number of ways. It could just be us doing a routine inspection of other trees and seeing a stump, or it could be through a call to 311, an email, a colleague. There's just a wide range, but just to try to, share all the information that we have. This was a complaint received in August from someone who lived on the block. So it was a neighbor, and it looks like they didn't wish, I don't see any contact information. All the names on this sheet are all city employees from different agencies. So that's how this one came to our attention. Coincidentally, we had evaluated this tree in the top foreground next door for removal in the last couple of years. So we actually happen to have a photo by accident of the subject tree. So the subject tree is the shorter tree in the background. There's a green line. That green line shows the approximate location of the end of the public right-of-way or sidewalk in the beginning of the property. So that's what this image is showing. Here's another view. The arrow, we don't mean to be pointing to the bush, but again, the subject tree is the two trunk or two stem tree behind it. And this shows that the subject tree that was removed without a permit was in fact within 10 feet of a public right-of-way. The 13-foot public right-of-way is measured from the face of the curb in towards the property. And the tree was just a few feet off of that, so well within 10 feet of a public right-of-way. Now, for a tree to be considered significant, it just needs to meet one size criteria, and that is a height greater than 20 feet, a canopy width 15 feet or greater, excess of 15 feet, and a trunk diameter 4.5 feet above grade that is exceeds 12 inches. And so in this case, we believe that the size criteria that was met is both the canopy width being greater than 15 feet wide, and also the trunk diameter being at least 12 inches in diameter. When we received the complaint from the public, we had an urban forestry inspector, Marcus Dotson, visited the site to document where the tree was located, the width of the right-of-way, and if the trunk, which is all that we had to go by, met the size criteria. And the size criteria, again, is 12 inches or greater, excess of 12 inches, 4.5 feet above grade. We measured the trunk of the tree at 6 inches above grade as being 22 inches in diameter. So even if you factored in a really aggressive trunk taper going up several feet, the tree still qualified as a significant tree. Again, just looking at images, it looks like there's construction, was construction earlier sometime in the last year or two. Now, I do note there's no tree protection in place for this significant tree. So even though we didn't emphasize that in our prelude here, typically what we'd want to see is no construction activity within the drip line of a protected tree. So as a significant tree, it has tree protection requirements as if it's a street tree. That's somewhat water under the bridge at this point, but again, just looking at the overall site. And then just, we pull up parcel maps. This is the subject property, 60 Ventura Avenue. It has a public right-of-way of 13 feet measured from the face of the curb. That's a solid gray line. And another image just to share is, that's not here. Okay, let me go back to screen share. Here we go. We measure the public right-of-way using parcel maps. And Let's go back to presentation mode. I'll be done in just a moment. Thank you for your patience. We check parcel maps to verify that the public right-of-way is a certain distance. So the property doesn't necessarily begin at where the sidewalk ends. There's also an unnamed public right-of-way next to the side of this property. We have this scenario probably hundreds of times in the city, but somewhat unusual, but not unheard of. What the implication is, though, is that there are actually could be a backyard tree if it's within 10 feet of this unnamed public right-of-way. Those trees too would be considered significant protected trees. So it's not just that the tree in the front yard was protected, but there may be additional trees in the backyard that are within 10 feet of the public right-of-way. Our inspector measured what remained of the trunk very carefully to establish the diameter, 6 inches above grade. And the reason for this is the fine issued is extremely severe. I understand that $10,000 is a very large sum of money. The challenging part of this violation is that we now need to also require that a replacement tree of equivalent size when measured 6 inches above grade be planted. And this is going to need to be done through a number of different ways. It's very unlikely that a property owner can plant a replacement tree that is this large. The extreme examples are like Apple Park, where you have a blank slate and you can just come in with huge equipment and drop a huge tree in. That's not going to be the case here due to infrastructure conflicts. So we're going to need to work with a property owner to come up with a way that they can plant the equivalent of 22 inches of replacement diameter. Options will include replacing both in the right-of-way, if necessary, at the curb, or in the front yard within 10 feet of the right-of-way. The idea is that we need trees to be replaced that have the potential to become significant trees in the future. So there's potentially 2 locations in the front yard setback. There could be a site in the backyard within 10 feet of that unnamed public walkway that would qualify. So I guess if there's any good news here, there are some unique opportunities that this property affords where many others don't have those options. So we're going to be looking in this resulting decision, regardless of the disposition of the fine amounts that remains, we're going to need to really talk about how we get 22 inches of trunk diameter replaced as future significant trees or as street trees in the right-of-way. And that's something we can work very closely with the property owner on. I think I've covered plenty, probably more than enough. And again, we don't issue the fines. It's not cost effective. We're just trying to make sure that we protect existing mature trees to maintain the public trust. And whomever removed the tree should have been a qualified tree contractor and would have been aware of the codes regulating trees in the city. So I'd like to hear a little bit more about, who it was who removed the tree, because it's largely, an issue between the contractor who did that removal and should have known that a permit's required. So it's as much time as we want to hear the property owner, I also want to just gently point out that whomever did that removal, whether they are licensed or not, took on a lot of responsibility. But that issue is largely an issue between the property owner and their contractor. With that said, we appreciate that the owner has appealed and, want to hear from them and the hearing officer as well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Chris. Before we go to the appellant, I want to clarify one question. Please clarify for me what you mean by your willingness to work with the property owner for replacement.
Sure. So
what that means in terms of fines and going forward next steps, if you could just clarify that for me.
Okay, thank you. In February of 2022, our code was changed to stiffen penalties, and that's where they meaning the Board of Supervisors, approved strengthening our ordinance to require that the minimum fine for removal without a permit is $10,000. The other thing that they did, which has become much more challenging, not that that's a huge amount of money, but folks need to replace equivalent trunk size. And it's going to be challenging in a lot of ways. Let's say you remove a street tree. It's going to probably require that you end up planting trees down the street in front of other adjacent property owner homes. It's quite a concept that, the tree is removed, and the idea is that we're recovering, canopy and environmental benefits.
Mhm.
So what I mean by willingness to work is we're going to need to be, I wouldn't use the word creative. We need to be consistent with how we handle similar cases, but we need to work to come up with how many trees can potentially be planted, spacing them reasonably from each other, that would be potentially significant in the future within 10 feet of the right of way. And so examples would be potentially, if there's no utility conflicts, perhaps a couple of trees in that front yard setback area, possibly a tree in the sidewalk. The tree in the sidewalk would eventually become the city's responsibility after 3 years of establishment. Significant trees would remain property owner responsibility. So I think, I really think what's going to be required as the next step is perhaps to meet on site and look at what those options might be with the property owner, and really kind of get into the weeds on how this is implemented.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So can I have the appellant speak now? In the absence of any other comments from you, Chris? Yes, please go ahead.
Hi, my name is Yashvini Adarkar. I am the property owner at 60 Ventura. And I am deeply regretful for the accidental removal of this tree. I had submitted to Miss Susan Nawberry our written sort of appeal, and I'll just go ahead and read it in a second. So I said, we are very sad that this tree was accidentally removed due to a miscommunication. I know that this does not change the illegality of it, but I hope you will let me explain via this letter. Our home has been undergoing a remodel over the past year, and for the duration of the remodel, we had moved out of the house and were living in a rental property in San Francisco. At the time, I was pregnant with our second child and was considered high risk, so had been limiting my movements and had not been to the house for a couple of weeks. As you noted in Mr. Chris's presentation, the complaint was received on August 24th, and our second child was born on August 22nd at CPMC Van Ness. And as as childbirth goes, it was not a time where I was on my phone a lot or able to communicate a lot with our contractors. We were talking to them mainly over the phone or via text message. And as they were repaving our driveway, we found that the main water line was extremely close to the surface. I can show you a picture in a second. It was less than 8 inches under the grade of the surface, and the roots of the trees were interfering with the pipe. We had some back and forth around this issue at the time, and there was a miscommunication, and the tree was accidentally removed. It was definitely not our intention, and both personally and professionally for me, this was something that I did not want to have happen, as I've worked for many years in reforestation projects while I lived in New York City. So it was our original intention to actually plant a second mature tree in our front yard or on the sidewalk strip, and we would love to work with the department to figure out the best location for this. We will continue with our plan of planting a mature tree, but now sadly it will have to be a replacement tree instead of a second tree. And if I may, I would love to show a picture of the water line.
Please go ahead.
Okay, just a moment. I have to promote you to panelist to show, and you do have 1 minute left. Just a moment.
I promoted her already. I
Oh, okay.
promoted her.
When you come back on, you need to unmute yourself, please.
Can you see my screen?
No, not yet. If you share
Okay.
your screen.
Oh. Share screen, there we go. So this is a picture taken a little bit later, but as you will see, this is the main water line that is just running under the driveway surface. And this was the impetus for the conversation around the tree and the water line and how they interfere. And right here where my mouse is where the tree originally used to be. And this is the baby that was
Aw.
born 2 days before. So yeah, that is my appeal.
Thank you. Cute baby.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Do we have any public comments for this hearing order number 207514? Are there any public comments? In the absence of any other public comments, we will close that hearing order 207514. Now we are moving to order number 207515, and this is to consider an appeal from the property owner for the fine issued for the illegal pruning of 5 street trees and 1 significant tree on the property of 1851 Norega Street. The fine levied for this illegal pruning is 13,812. I know, Chris, you started to talk about that. Thank you.
Madam
you.
Hearing Officer, can I just interject? We do not have a chat feature, so I just want to let the Ms. Yashvini know that you will be making your decision, and we will issue everything to her through email, because I was unable to write that in.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Cerise, just confirming you can hear my audio and the PowerPoint's up.
Yes.
Thank you. And sorry again for the confusion on taking these out of order. So this is order 20715, 1851 Noriega Street. It's a corner property on Noriega and 26th Avenue. An appeal from the property owner for the fine issued for illegal pruning of 5 street trees and 1 significant tree. Significant tree is on private property. The street trees are adjacent to the property. The fine levied for the illegal pruning is $13,812. So what I like to do is just show a before photo of the subject trees. I believe this is Google sometime earlier in 2022, just taken from that. The species, as I was getting into it earlier, is a red flowering gum. They flower in July and August, and it used to be considered a eucalyptus in the genus Eucalyptus. It's now in a different genus referred to as Corymbia, and the species is Phycifolia. So it's a broadleaf evergreen tree that has broad leaves year-round. It's not deciduous, meaning it doesn't lose its leaves all at once and have a period of dormancy. It replaces its leaves kind of cyclically over a 1 to 3 year process. So these trees in this photo aren't necessarily large canopy wise. Based on the size of the trunks, these trees typically would be much larger, clearly have been pruned over the years, from the property. When in this particular case, this was a combination of, it wasn't a service request from the public who filed or called the city. This is both something that our urban forestry inspector, Susan Nawberry, saw during routine inspections and performing work in the area. But I also happened to drive by. There's a stop sign right at the corner, and I saw this, and just said, "Whoop, okay, this is This is not how we want to see trees pruned. So I did refer it to our urban forestry inspector for that zone, that district, to inspect, and if confirming what we believed happened, issue a fine for excessive pruning. So I'll go through each tree individually and just remind everyone we've covered a lot of information, but overall, again, trees need leaves to carry on photosynthesis, and cutting trees really heavily like this, even though it may be well-intended and is not necessarily malicious or gross negligence, is just simply not good for a tree. And our preference is certainly education over issuing fines. That's our goal. Someday we hope to not have to issue any fines and just be 100% outreach. Again, that's aspirational. And sometimes, as we'll discuss today, there are a lot of times when trees have been pruned this way and no one on the block is ever informed, other than an owner who completed that work, that pruning like that's not allowed. And so I think that's something that is an ongoing challenge and goal of Public Works, is to just educate as many property owners and members of the public as possible. So again, looking at the subject trees, again, I just want to point out that the overhead lines in this case are phone and cable. These are not lines that the owner is required to prune away from. It's something that PG&E will prune if required. And this is that slide we showed earlier, that there really is a great program that PG&E is required by law to keep trees and vegetation away from the conductors that are actual public safety concerns, but not the lowest lines on the pole. So the first tree is on the far right. We number trees with the flow of traffic, as if there was a tree crew on that side of the street approaching a property. So tree 1 is on the uphill side. Again, from a distance, it may not look all that bad. It might look fine, but as you get closer, you can see that the top of the canopy was removed. These are topping cuts, heading cuts, not pruned back to laterals, but leaving stubs. So again, long-term damage to the tree is the concern here. Going back, this is a view taken from the property looking out at the tree. You can see where the topping cuts occurred. Again, these are referred to as topping cuts or stub cuts. And I would say conservatively for this particular tree, at least 50% or more of the living canopy was removed, probably even more than that. The next tree, actually, I should have shown a before photo. This tree was not doing well in general. It was certainly smaller than any of the others, and maybe a potential removal candidate. That's something that our urban forestry inspector can look into. But that said, it was excessively pruned and had, again, nearly all of its foliage removed when we documented it. And just going down the line, tree number 3 is the next tree in the row with the blue arrow. Again, 100% of the foliage removed, topping or heading cuts made, really not with tree health in mind, but it's kind of arbitrary places within the tree's structure. And tree 4 and tree 5 with the same type of large pruning cuts, many of them cutting, leaving stubs, not pruning back to laterals, and trying to leave that foliage that the tree needs to carry on photosynthesis. Tree 5, very similar condition that we found. Again, excessively pruned, 100% of the canopy removed. And the final tree that's part of this hearing is technically referred to as a significant tree, meaning it's a tree that's on private property, but within 10 feet of a public right-of-way that has the same protections as if it's a street tree. And this tree too had 100% of the foliage removed, with large stub cuts remaining. So it has the same protections as if it's a street tree. Now, this said, I do want to share, Google Street View is an amazing tool, and it really just helps us all collectively establish a little bit of the site history. And I think that really helps because one of the things that I mentioned earlier in the hearing, and this will just take a few more minutes and then I'll conclude my presentation, but historically, these trees have been the maintenance responsibility of the adjacent property owner, just like 2/3 of street trees in San Francisco. That changed with a vote in November 2018, when Prop E passed by 79% or so, stating should the city be responsible for trees in the public right of way. And so the city, the residents voted, and the answer is yes. Now we began that maintenance responsibility on July 1st, 2017. And so we are still seeing across the city, it's going to take many, many years of educating the public about these changes and that the responsibility is now with the city. So we have been issuing violations and fines for years, at least 20 years, well before I started working for the city. So it's something that even if they were privately maintained, we still would issue fines when we came across a violation. But I did want to point out that looking at Google Street View, you can see that there was a history of maintenance here, very similar to what occurred recently, which is June 2008. We can see the trees had been very heavily pruned, not meeting our pruning standards. Again, in April 2011, again in September 2014. And what I noticed is roughly every 3 years or so, clearly the property owner manager was pruning the trees in this way. And we don't have a record of having ever issued a fine before or issuing a warning. So it's really a site with very little, history to it. Again, April 2017, trees heavily pruned by the property owner. So again, how we found it in September of this year. So I do want to point out that, we received an appeal from the property owner and the representatives. And I do want to state we issue fines and not to be confrontational, but to try to educate the public about proper tree care. So we're not here to demonize anyone, but we're really here to have a discussion about the damage that occurred, why it occurred, and why we want to change that behavior in the future so that we can develop more of a canopy in these trees, a more sustainable canopy. And so I did review the appeal letter. The appeal letter is required to trigger the scheduling of this item for a hearing. So in that regard, it was received by our urban forestry inspector and reviewed, and the item was scheduled for the hearing. With that said, the only additional feedback is I really did want to present these images on Google Street View, as it did sort of corroborate, that's probably too strong a word, but it does show that the owner had been consistently maintaining the trees, probably not as extremely as this, but they have been pruning the trees on a regular basis, assuming best intent, trying to manage the trees as they could. So the goal with Street Tree SF is to kind of take that responsibility out of the hands and off of the property owner and assume that for the property owner moving forward. So what Public Works recommends at this point is that as these trees are filling out, no doubt, that Public Works maintain the trees and prune them as part of our routine maintenance cycle. That said, to be consistent with how we've handled similar cases, when we find that trees have been excessively pruned, we issued the fine of $2,302 per tree to be consistent with how we've handled similar cases. And that concludes the staff presentation. Thank you.
So I just wanted to clarify for myself that this pruning has been happening every 3 years since 2008, but there hasn't been there's no documentation of maybe fines or warnings to the owner.
Correct.
Okay.
And it's not always required to issue a warning ahead of time, but it is noteworthy because sometimes we've issued warnings or citations before, and the behavior that we want to try to prevent occurs again. I can confirm that we don't have any history like that here. So this is
Okay.
a pretty, we're kind of starting from scratch and acknowledging what they stated in their appeal, that they had kind of been managing the trees this way for probably way before 2008.
Okay.
Yeah,
Thank you. So can we have the appellant come up for this hearing order number 207515? Yes, go ahead. Do you have something to share? You're muted, you could speak. Do you have something to share? Do you have a presentation? Should we promote you to
No, I don't.
panelist?
You can hear me? I do not.
Yes, we can hear you.
I just would like to speak for my allotted 3 minutes. So as you can see, my name is Rabbi Joel Landau. I've been in the position here at Adat Israel since 2013. And the gardener that the congregation has been using predates me. And to be very honest, I had requested that he prune the trees, or actually trim them was the language I used. And I was quite surprised when the trees were excessively pruned. That was not the congregation's intention. What's important to know, though, is why we wanted to trim the trees. There were two reasons. One is a significant segment of our congregation are elderly, and the amount of leaves that were falling on the pavement was excessive, and when damp are a hazard. Now, I called 311 about this, and they explained to me that eventually, in several years, the city will cut the trees back. And that presented a challenge to the congregation because this was a clear and present danger in the present. In addition to that, the degree to the confidence we have in PG&E over the past few years has been diminished for reasons I won't go into, but I think all of us are aware of. And therefore, that was the motivation with the upcoming high holidays that were going to be in September. Therefore, in August, we wanted to make sure that there would not be any hazards for our senior congregants. Now, clearly, as quite evident, we never intended to injure any of the trees, and our intention, as is understood, and by the way, Mr. Buck's presentation was phenomenal. I learned a lot. It was very interesting. And I think that objectively speaking, the degree of confusion about this issue is considerable, meaning the fact that that there's a problem to begin with pruning in any way, shape, or form. It's one thing to say that ignorance of not stopping at a stop sign is no excuse, because that's something that's pretty common and people are aware of. When it comes to laws that are created and the public does not have enough information, so I find it to be a little bit unfair to say that ignorance is not an excuse for what happens, unless things are adequately published. Now, I did note in one of the slides that Mr. Buck showed, there are signs that say, don't prune. Well, if such things would be posted around the city, then one could argue that whoever does this really has been forewarned, or minimally they should have inquired. But without that, it's very challenging, especially since the obligation has gone back and forth. So I realize my time is
30 seconds.
So as we're ending, in order to give a more comprehensive response from the synagogue, I'd like to call on one of our congregants, David Pilpel, to further explain where we're coming from. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. David Pilpel, good morning. So you have the two letters from the synagogue dated November 21st and today. I don't know that you've had time to review today's letter, which was submitted prior to or at the beginning of the hearing, but it was emailed to various of you. I can go through that if you'd like. I can put it on the screen if that's helpful. I was trying to streamline our time here and simply reference those points.
I have a copy of the email. I have the email. I have that.
Excellent, with today's letter as well.
10:15 a.m. Yes.
Sounds good. I did want to just highlight two brief points that were touched on earlier, and we're happy to take questions. There may or may not be some public comment on this issue as well. There is, as I believe Chris Buck indicated, no DPW enforcement history with respect to trees on or adjacent to the synagogue's property. And in reference to the Public Works Code, in relevant part, section 808A, it shall be unlawful for any person to intentionally, maliciously, or through gross negligence, injure or destroy a street tree, any tree on city property, a significant tree or a landmark tree, period. It is our contention that we did not, we, the synagogue, nor for that matter, the synagogue's landscape gardener, but certainly not the synagogue, did not intentionally, maliciously, or through gross negligence, injure or destroy any tree here. So it's kind of a basic thing to impose a fine if the alleged act, I think, hasn't been shown. There was no intention, maliciousness, or gross negligence here. And if city would argue otherwise, we'd be interested in hearing that, but we don't believe that's the case. I also just wanted to conclude by saying I have had a few productive conversations with Susan Nobbery.
30 seconds.
Thanks, from Buck. And I had a long conversation yesterday with Chris Buck, and I don't think we're in any massive disagreement here, and continue to cooperate and want to work collaboratively with the city in general and DPW in particular on these matters. Happy to take questions and engage in any further dialogue. Thanks very much for listening.
Thank you. Do we have any other public comments? If we have one more, was that David that just spoke?
Yes, that was David that just spoke. I don't know if it's that I didn't lower his hand.
I think you
sorry.
did, yeah.
Yeah, I'm sorry. My mother, who's also a congregant, is here and would like to speak with her.
Okay. Please go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Betty Hillpell. I've been a member of the congregation for at least 50 years, 60 years, and I was there when the ground was broken for the synagogue itself. I just want to say that those trees really have been a headache in terms of their foliage for forever. And I see that the cutting back has actually been a godsend, because we have these recent storms. Those branches and leaves would have been on the ground or hitting somebody conceivably. So in a way, I think we've done a really good thing. There are so many vital problems in the city. People are hungry, and you're worried about trees. I find that incomprehensible. Also, I want to note that you say you want to educate the public. Well, education is not giving out fines or citation. Education has to not to do with punishment, but rather with education in teaching and learning, not in reprimanding and punishing people, particularly if something has been done that wasn't intentionally inappropriate, if you will. These excessive leaves that have been falling from the trees for so long have been falling on pedestrians and parked cars, and now you can see the sidewalk and the street. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. Now, are there any other public comments for this hearing order number? Okay. If there are no other public comments, we're gonna go
Ms.
ahead. And
Taylor,
yes.
there is one
Oh,
hand.
one.
Vicky.
Okay, go ahead, Vicky.
Okay, Vicky, it says that I need to promote you to panelist because of the version you are using. So just one moment. Okay, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Okay, I just wanted to say I've been a member of the congregation for 40 years. And actually, I just wanted to say that we didn't mean to do what we did. I mean, whether or not, I mean, it's very dangerous, but that isn't, I mean, we did it because we didn't want it to be dangerous for all of our, I mean, I'm 71 and I'm one of the younger people of the shul. And also we are a nonprofit. We barely make it every year. And I'm sure you know with the COVID, you know, it's hard to even keep our doors open. But when I drove up and saw what we did not, I'm a board member, we did not request, you know, that the gardener do what he did. And even though I saw all those pictures, I've been there for, 40 years, so I've seen the trees. I saw the pictures you showed, and it looked like it was too, that we trimmed too much. Nobody ever told us we were doing anything wrong. And I understand about ignorance of the law and this, that, and the other thing. But I was very upset when I saw how because not only I was afraid for the trees when I saw them, and even though I don't really know, I'm a retired public school teacher, but I called the rabbi right away, and he said, "I know, Vicky, I'm so upset. We didn't ask him to cut it like that." So we don't even know why he did it. I don't know if the rabbi now knows, but I understand we're the ones responsible. But we didn't mean to do it, and we would, believe me, we're not trying to do something sneaky. We would never do it again. And, we will obviously try to work with you. I'm sure you know from David and the rabbi that we would try to work with you. We were just, we usually do it about every 3 years before the high holidays, because we have, people fall and slip. But it wasn't because Chris had said earlier that the type of tree it is, is sort of a nuisance because of, how things drop on the ground and this and that. And we've even had, the roots on some of those trees are coming up through the sidewalk, and we've had to fix the sidewalk several times. But we never thought of taking them out or ruining them or anything. So I just wanted to say that it wasn't intentional. I think you know that. And even though I guess what Chris said is every 3 years we have trimmed it.
30 seconds.
So every 3 years we've trimmed it, because the truth is we can't afford to do it every year. And we never meant, if somebody had maybe told us how to do it, we would have done a better job. That's it.
Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you. Thanks.
Do we have any other public comments for this hearing order number 207515? Okay. I don't see any other hands up. So in the absence of any other public comments, I would close this order number. And so this brings us to the end of this hearing session. So thank you all for participating. I have one more hand up, but this has nothing to do with the other numbers because we've closed them. So I'm going to allow you to speak. Unmute. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask about next steps. I know you said you would refer this matter to the director and they would make a final decision, but do you have a sense of timeline or what we should expect in terms of communication? Will it be an email or a letter?
It's usually within less than 2. Sharice, do you want to address that, or Chris?
The turnaround time will probably be between 2 to 3 weeks. The hearing officer will make her recommendations to the director. Then the director will make a decision and then issue it back to our department. And then we will issue it to you via email.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay. Thank you, everyone. This now ends the session. Thank you.